Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Breakout 3, Achieving Impact from the Start. I just checked that myself to make sure I'm in the right room. If anyone didn't think they were in this session, you've probably got about 30 seconds to run to the next one. If not, please stay and enjoy, hopefully, a really interesting conversation. We've had a lot of conversations today around some fairly big topics, and today we're really hoping to have an interactive session with all of the people in the room and get your thoughts and feedback, so you leave today hopefully knowing more than you came in with. Just let people grab a seat. As far as I'm aware, I'm looking to Mark in the corner, we're running the session to the same time scales, so we've got 50 minutes. So as I say, hopefully lots of time for questions. But to start, let me introduce myself. I'm Dan Murray, I'm Director of Client Services at Sedex. And I'm very delighted to be joined by some of my colleagues on the panel, but I've also got some external speakers. And I'm just going to ask them to introduce themselves. Perhaps if I start with Rob on the right-hand side. We've got two Robs, just to confuse me. Just if you could introduce yourself to the room, let them know a little bit about yourself.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rob Chester. I'm Managing Director for NSF in the UK. I'm pretty new to NSF. I've been in there 18 months. Prior to that, I had 13 years at Walmart and then 12 years at Tesco. And thinking about what I was going to say today, I'm going to talk, as I try and give my examples, as a young 25-year-old who presented to the Tesco board on ethical trading, as it was called then, and all the mistakes I made that hopefully you can learn from the errors and the mistakes that I made all those years ago. So,
I thought you were going to say you are 25. It was just which we would never have guessed that you were. Jose.
Hi, hello. My name is Jose Melero. I have been working for Sedex for almost 10 years. I'm managing the Sedex office in Chile for Latin America, and the idea is to provide examples which things we are hearing from suppliers in that part of the world. I think that will be useful for all of you. Thanks.
And Rob?
Yep, so Rob Wilton from Heathrow. So I've been at Heathrow just over a year now. So my role is Process and Performance Manager within the procurement team. So the role is essentially to look at putting in place the right processes, looking at ways that we can improve processes. So looking outside externally at what looks good and trying to apply that within Heathrow. Previous to Heathrow, I was at Centrica. So if you're not familiar with the name, so it's the holding company for British Gas. So operates downstream as British Gas and upstream in the oil and gas industry.
Fantastic. And Rebekah, last but not least.
My name is Rebekah. I'm part of the account management team within Sedex. I've been working at Sedex for about 7 years now. I also manage the ethical trade coordinator team as well, and I'll tell you a little bit more about those later.
Fantastic. And we've now introduced ourselves, so I'm actually going to ask for a little bit of audience participation to start with. I'm afraid I haven't got a sophisticated voting app, but it'd be great to know who we've got in the room in terms of organisation structures. So can I just get a show of hands for Sedex members in the room? Of those, if you perhaps bring your hands down or leave them up, if you're a buying organisation or a buyer supplier, so A or AB member. Fantastic. Have we got some supplier members, some B members in the room? Brilliant. I'm always excited that we see more and more hands coming up at that stage in my 4 years at Sedex anyway. And some audit company members. Great, so we've got a really good mix. Anyone else? Oh, Sedex team, yeah, you can keep that. That's fine. Fantastic. Oh, good. Well, we've got a really good selection of our membership categories, so I hope that will mean we get a diversity of questions, and I think we've got the right representation in the panel to answer, hopefully, all questions that come our way. But perhaps to begin, I just wanted to share a slide and some thinking around what we're going to be focusing on. And earlier today in Jonathan's opening, he shared the continuous improvement cycle. a slightly more up-to-date version of it than this, to be fair. But in terms of the actual blocks around the edges, these are the key areas that Sedex feels that we can work most productively with our members. And a lot of the products and services that we're working on is based around this continuous improvement cycle. But for this session specifically, we're really going to be looking at that first quadrant. So that engagement with the suppliers, engaging with your own organisations, that internal stakeholder buy-in, through to, we put it in the block there as the self-assessment questionnaire, the questions that you're going out to your members. But that could be really any pre-assessment tool. So that's sort of early stages of engagement. Some of the challenges that brings, there will be some specifics to the Sedex SAQ, I'm sure, but also there will be some other views. And also how that starts feeding into risk assessment, how you start prioritising your business in what is a particularly complex area. To do that, as a bit of a scene setting, what I'm going to ask is a couple of the Sedex team on the panel just to share their insights in terms of how they're working with members in their particular areas, and some of their observations over the time that they've been working on in terms of the challenges perhaps and how we're trying to help them, but also any of the learnings they might have had in that particular area. So if I could start with Rebekah as part of our account management team, to just share some of your thoughts. And we've also got obviously a member up at the front and plenty of members in the room, so feel free to comment if you're not 100% sure or anything, or you think that she's pulling the wool over your eyes in terms of how we work. Rebekah.
So we have a number of different members, and I manage about 50 different members within Sedex, a range of members from brands to first tier suppliers, packaging suppliers, and there are a number of different common challenges that members have when they first join. One of the things that we often provide support on is communications. So once a member has kind of decided to join Sedex as an A or an AB member, the next challenge is to communicate within the business and get internal buy-in to start working with suppliers or with the procurement teams. And one of the ways that we often support members is to build up a communication package by supplying collateral, marketing materials, coming in to meet with you as a member and providing more insight and doing workshops and things like that to start thinking about how you're going to be implementing Sedex within your business. So that's one of the first kind of common challenges and things that we can help to overcome with when you first join. The second area that we often provide support with is actually gathering supplier data. For many of our members, one of the challenges is having clean supplier data and supplier data that's in one place and to hand. There's a lot of big and small, kind of smaller businesses that have challenges where they hold supplier data. So a lot of our members, we find, don't all hold their supplier data in one place, or different people own different relationships with suppliers, and the relationship that a procurement team might have with the supplier isn't necessarily the contact that's needed to move forward with completing the self-assessment questionnaire, for example. So again, we help with trying to get the right contact within those businesses and providing the right communications and messages. One of the things that we always encourage is to have a common message across your business. So not just having or making sure that the procurement teams and you and whoever's going to be communicating with the supplier are telling them the same thing so that they don't get confused right from the outset. So those are kind of two big challenges that we can help to overcome right at the start of your Sedex journey.
I think just to the audience, just perhaps again as a show of hands, is communication and collecting supplier data, is that something that rings true? Is that some of the challenges that you faced in the room? I see nodding heads, so that's encouraging. I think, again, I might get a perspective perhaps from Rob, from a Heathrow perspective. Is that something as well that you've had to look at when you've started this journey in terms of where do I find the data?
Yeah, because, and it's one of the challenges we face. So the driver for Heathrow joining Sedex was we published our first modern slavery statement last year, and that required us to basically to follow the principles of the Act, so the Modern Slavery Act, so undertaking due diligence in the supply chain, assessing our supply chain for risk and so on. So to actually create the programme, we needed to identify suppliers that would be part of the campaign, and part of the challenge, as Rebekah has said, is that often the information comes from the procurement team, and they will have the contact details, hopefully, of the account manager. That account manager might not necessarily be the person that's on point within that organisation for things like modern slavery, sustainability, environment, health and safety and so on. So one of the challenges we faced was that when we launched the campaign, particularly in large organisations, the information ended up going around and around within that organisation and didn't really kind of end up anywhere. So we had to constantly go back and keep chasing, and that was one of the challenges we had, I think.
Perfect. And perhaps Rob as well, I know you obviously Tesco's and Walmart as previous employees, I mean huge supply chains. I presume that data challenge must be magnified perhaps in those environments.
Yeah, enormous. I mean, it really is. And I think it comes back to a dichotomy of something that was talked about in there, because one of the things that most boards really focus on, and a mantra they usually use, is control what you can control, which essentially does get you driving towards your first tier supply chain, because that essentially is where you have usually the most knowledge for a start, but also you have the most control because you've got the contractual relationships that are there with them. But I sort of agree with some of the challenges that have been talked to today, that often that is probably not where the problems and the challenges are. They're further down the supply chain, but that can get tricky with boards because they look at you as if to say, well, we don't have any control the further you get away from us. So actually, you're saying that's where the biggest problems are, but really, do we have the power to do it? But yeah, no, most businesses will start with that first tier and want to ensure that they've got the checks and balances in place there, even if arguably that's not where most of the challenges and the issues actually are.
Great. I think just thinking aside, from a Sedex perspective for members, there's a couple of things there that I think are useful. One is you're part of a community where potentially some of those suppliers are already sharing data, and that's one of the great advantages we hope we bring to this conversation is use the team to see what of those suppliers are already there. So we have some supplier matching tools. Equally, I think talk internally with your business, speak to finance. Quite often they hold a lot of records that perhaps are different records from the ones in the procurement team, and I think it's around trying to get that whole buy-in as an organisation. So data, definitely one of the challenges, something we might explore a little bit further as we get into some more questions. But I suppose once we found out who those suppliers are, then we tend to be, the next stage is going out to the suppliers and asking them potentially a set of questions. So I'm going to actually ask Jose just to give a perspective from a Sedex perspective of some of the questions we get from our supplier members as this sudden deluge of information they're being asked to share comes down, and perhaps how we can make the most positive impact for the supplier in that journey.
Yes, I think under my experience working with suppliers, we are working with suppliers from Mexico until Chile or Latin America. I think there is some points which are important. First, sometimes we can think that some topics are very normal for us, like discrimination. But when we talk with some suppliers in a rural area in Colombia or in Chile or in other areas, you can find out that this is not a topic. They don't understand the idea behind that. And it's difficult this is a challenge for us because we are supporting suppliers, we are asked supporting suppliers with the system, but also we are supporting them with the general idea behind ethical trade. Also, other challenge which I think is very interesting is sometimes we think that this ethical trade is the most important thing, but at the end, from a supplier point of view, they are dealing with many requests on good agricultural practices or good manufacturing practices, many other things. Then we think normally those suppliers have one person which is dealing with all these things. They don't have enough time. They don't have the time to learn many things. They are running to deal with these kind of things, but they don't have the knowledge. They don't have the capability to deal with all these things properly. And this is a challenge for us because we need to speak with them. We need to explain them which things are behind this, and then this is an important challenge for us. And I agree. There is another important point that Rebekah said. For us, like Sedex office or for suppliers' point of view, it's very important to have a very clear communication from buyers, from A and EB members, because sometimes they are just asking for an audit or to join Sedex or to upload the self-assessment questionnaire, but at the end, they don't understand which idea is behind this. Then it's very important. This is something we are hearing always when we receive calls, in our conversations, in our meetings. We have done like workshops in Brazil, in Mexico. We are hearing the same issue always. Another important challenge, I think, is from a supplier's point of view is, and in the previous panel, this issue was, many people talk about that, is normally suppliers are receiving two calls. Yeah? One from the ethical trade department saying, okay, you need to fill the questionnaire, you will have an audit, we are friends, we need to work together, long-term relations, all these things, but at the same time, a couple of days before or after, they are receiving a second call from like the commercial department saying, okay, what's happening with the prices, your price must be reduced, we will pay you in more days. Then, and it is an important issue. I'm just saying which kind of thing we are hearing always in Chile and from Latin America. And I think those issues are important to think about that, or to have a better ethical trade or all these things.
Yeah, I think building on that, Jose, have you come across some good examples where perhaps some of those challenges have been addressed at the outset, at the start? You may not, but have you had good examples of that? And again, I'll probably open that up to all of the panel just to see where those engagements have been most successful.
Yeah, I think when we can make a difference between some companies which understand that the ethical trade or the good labor conditions are important. Yeah? And from the start, I think companies who are using the self-assessment questionnaire as a tool to learn and to improve, or when they are using the audit as an opportunity to learn and improve, I can think those examples are more successful. But generally, or not generally, but the majority are just doing this as a checklist. Okay, did you fill the questionnaire? Yes. Okay, yeah, checklist. Did you complete the audit? Checklist. But when they understand that this is an opportunity to them to learn, if any B member or supplier member wants to hire a consultancy on CSR or anything, it's very expensive. But when they use the tool, the self-assessment questionnaire is a tool to learn, the audit is an opportunity to improve, then when they are using that as an opportunity to improve their labor conditions, health and safety conditions, I can see that they have better results, they understand what is behind that, but it's very important to have a clear message from the buyers, because this, I think, is closely related with them.
Anyone else from the panel would add to that? Yeah.
I'd just wait one point, which is back to the previous discussion in the last room, which is that's where the term compliance actually does no favours. Because ultimately, when something from a compliance lands on a desk in an organisation, usually people only want to give one answer. And that's it, everything's okay, everything's fine. And so that is where I do believe that the compliance bit and where we want to go, great example from Phillips this morning, that is where I think it gets you off potentially on the wrong foot, because for most business leaders, they will see a compliance checklist, self-assessment questionnaire, however you band it, landing, and generally their answer to that and their approach to that is going to be to want to make sure we've got everything covered. Have we got everything covered?
Yeah, sorry, Rob.
Yeah, just to build on what Jose and Rob said. So Jose touched on how challenging it can be to get suppliers to sign up, and I think it's challenging both in terms of getting the suppliers to sign up, but also getting the buyers, your internal buyers, to get engaged. And I think that engagement piece is really important, because you're right, Jose. I mean, there's lots of things that we ask procurement people to do. So they are being asked to assess suppliers, both in terms of quality, cost, health and safety, financial risk, environmental, a whole host of things that they'll be asked to do. And the risk is that unless they're engaged in the process, it's simply a compliance thing. It's get the supplier to register. And from a top-down perspective, the senior leadership or the board will just be thinking, just get the suppliers to register. I'm sure they'll get it and they'll love it, but that's often not the case. And I think it's important the compliance bit is quite interesting, because I think it's like with any form of motivation. If you're simply told to do something, you might do it or you might not, but actually if you're emotionally engaged with it, then it's more likely that you will do it. So on a mental engagement level, on an emotional level, if you can get your buyer and your supplier to buy into the concept that modern slavery, health and safety is the right thing to do emotionally, then there's a lot better chance of them actually becoming part of the program and wanting to drive that through their supply chain as well.
Just to again elaborate on that, Rob, could you say in terms of your program how you've done that? Is it a box of chocolates on the desk of the procurement team?
No,
are there other ways to get them engaged?
Yeah. So what we did was so as Rebekah said, we got some support from Sedex, but we also there's some quite good agencies out there, such as A21 and the Stronger Together campaign. And if you go online and have a look at their videos, they're very good at getting the audience to make an emotional connection. So the Stronger Together campaign, for example, had two actors who, the scenario was two people that have been trafficked into the UK and their experience. So it was a real life example, although it was played by actors. And when we played this to a room full of procurement people, you could sense the atmosphere change. So it went from one of, here's another thing we've got to do, to, people actually looking quite emotional. And it's at that point they said, oh, I get it. I know why we're doing it now. And that was the difference, I think.
Yeah. And another adage I've tried to integrate into my career is never let a good crisis go to waste. And I do believe in this world that is incredibly important, because ultimately there will be issues and they will be out there, and highlighting those in your business, both good and bad, when people have good and get applauded for the approach they've taken, it is really important to get that on the merchant's desk and the buyer's desk, that they understand that there's reward for this. But at the same time, when things go wrong, it is also equally important that that gets highlighted, because ultimately, if they see it as front and centre and see it as part of what they're doing, that they are just more likely to engage with the process than it be a compliance type approach.
Perfect. I think one of the other things, again, just in the wider context of this, is we've talked earlier in some sessions, I think Jonathan certainly mentioned it, and I know Martine mentioned it as well, is language, and not just when I say the physical language. I mean, Sedex members are in 150 countries, so we by no means cover all of them. We're working on that, and we're always keen to hear from members where they need additional support in that. But I think also the language with which we communicate from a CSR, sustainability, all of these words that I think Jose mentioned that we use in our day-to-day lives potentially that aren't familiar to other people outside of that space. And I think it's very interesting how you review that.
Just to complement that, I agree absolutely with that, because in countries like Brazil, I know 99.9% don't speak English. They need to have the information in Portuguese or in Spanish. And also, other good example is many times there is a local problem. For instance, in one country, Latin America, I will not say the name, but they have a very weak labor law. Yeah, and then for the auditor, it's very difficult to deal with the audit, because the ATI base code is saying something, but the local law is saying something absolutely different. And then the people, the supplier, workers, don't understand the difference because there is a problem internally. And there is a good example of British retailers. They did a partnership, a work with local organizations, and they work with the government to change that, because they express it to the government that there is an issue. And then these kind of things are very good examples how we can improve workers' life, because at the end we are here for that. And it was a very good example. I know Tesco was involved in that.
Perfect. I might just pause there just quickly and go out to the audience if there's any questions that have come out just on that first section that you might have for our panel, or alternatively any suggestions that you might have, having heard that, and then some good practice that perhaps you can share with the rest of the room. Don't be shy. There's a microphone. Just there. I was just going to give you a microphone.
It's coming. Last session downstairs disturbed me greatly, because that panel that was there was talking about negative side of what we all try to achieve. And I still question why we're talking about compliance. Why are we talking about levels of excellence? We have different legislation in different countries, as you pointed out. We have different levels of auditors' expertise in some of those matters. We know that in some countries we have a choice between calling somebody non-compliant but from human rights correct behavior. You can be compliant from legislation point of view and have hungry people at the end of that process. One has to balance these things, and from supply point of view, from brand point of view, I think it's more important the level of progress we make rather than compliance. We know that occupational health and safety is legislative requirement. We know that EPA in most countries is a legislative requirement. We know that companies have to comply with a whole range of legal requirements. The only optional thing that is left to us is business ethics, and they will differ from culture to country to where they are at on a scale. So after this session this afternoon, I'm saying, we're pointing fingers at auditors not doing the right job, suppliers not doing the right job, brands not doing the right job, but in fact we all have heart in the same place, except we don't have the same app.
No, I think that's a great observation. I think hopefully sessions like this and bringing members today together at the start of a journey means that we can challenge some of those mistakes or areas that we've got it wrong before, or certainly learn from the best practice. So I think, impact at the start, I'm not sure a lot of the people in this room may not be at the beyond compliance stage and perhaps having some of those challenges, but it certainly we want to keep in the back of our minds. I don't know anything from the panel in terms of feedback to that particular comment.
I'd just make one. I do think it's important, though, for each organisation to start that journey by agreeing where they want to be. Because I was a chief compliance officer in a developing market, And my starting point for that was to have a discussion with the board to say, generally in my world, 5 levels of compliance. Crooks, do something when you get caught, you're in the pack, you're leading on some aspects, and you're trying to lead on everything. You want to be world class. So I had a very clear description in my head of what that compliance journey would look like. And I wanted to at least start with a discussion around where do we want to be, guys? Where are we aspiring to be? Because at least if you know then what you're aspiring to be, and you can then benchmark where are you today, where do you want to get to, I think that's really important internally for buy-in. Because you may have some people that are at a different level on that. You may have some people, some directors who just want to be, I want to be in the pack. I don't want to lead on that aspect. I just want to make sure we're doing a great job every day and getting it right every day. But you may have some directors who, I want to absolutely lead on that aspect. So I think it is important to get clarity about where you want to be on that journey as you start, because otherwise you can end up taking your organisation to a place that maybe they don't want to be. It's important to get clarity at the start.
Is there anything else from anyone else? There's a question just there.
I think it was a quite interesting fact that you came up with as a contradiction between the buying department wanting a cheap price but also ethical assurance. To what extent is there a contradiction between, as a supplier, sharing your supply chain with a customer, such as Tesco, who have vertical supply chain models? To what extent do you leave yourself open to that being stolen and copycat? Is that something that a company like Tesco would look to do, or is that too deep a question?
So no, I can't, obviously it's a long time since I worked at Tesco, so I can't answer on Tesco's behalf, but I would tell you that absolutely has been a paradox through this. Everybody wants more transparency on supply chain, and do I believe that's where we're headed? Absolutely. So I believe if you look forward 10 years, one of the things that will absolutely develop is that basically this thought that people don't know where your things are coming from, I just think that's going to disappear. I think the transparency is going to be there, whether you want it to be there or not. I think it's coming. And so my starting point would be to embrace that, would be to find a way that you're going to make that work, because I just believe it's a reality that's coming. So not a Tesco answer, but that's where I believe it's headed.
Do you have any advice on protecting yourself from monopolistic behaviours like the one that I just explained?
Can I think about that for a second? Somebody else talk and I'll think.
Yeah. I'd like to complement your comment. When once a supplier told me an example, and he told me that, for instance, supermarkets cannot leave their shelves without tomatoes. Yeah. This is the key point. What happened with ethical trade? I agree with Rob that I can see that supermarkets, retailers are doing a huge effort. They are assessing their suppliers, they are doing many jobs with them, they are supporting. I can see that because when I started my work with Sedex 10 years ago, it was different. Now I can see the difference. It's important, the effort that companies are doing, but at the end, their shelves cannot be without tomatoes, as a supplier told me. And this is an interesting issue, or interesting challenge, because what happens if you just have one tomato suppliers and they didn't have good ethical trade results? Will you buy that or not? Then there is an issue which us, as customers, we need to think about that too, because if you go to the supermarket and if they don't have tomato, you will complain. Then it's not easy to deal with that, but it's something that interesting to think at least.
Full of a couple of answers now.
We're giving him time.
I do find, and again, I'm sorry, I'm just going to give a paradox, but I think it is an important paradox, which is, do you remember the answer in the last session about who should really try and make the biggest difference? And the answer came back, the people with the most power. So I always find that quite interesting, because we sort of can beat supermarkets up when they exercise that power, but then on the other hand, we really want them to exercise that power and make sure it all happens. I think that is an interesting dichotomy, but the best answer I can give you is that I think the dream for most retailers is that if you take tomatoes as an example, that they've got a reasonable number of suppliers that they're dealing with as partners. where they've got a long-term relationship, where the sustainability, the ethical trade aspect is part of that relationship and a part of that partnership ongoing, but it is long-term. Now, you never want to get to a monopolistic situation that you've only got one supplier of tomatoes, because that's not going to work for any retailer globally. That's not where you're going to head to and where you're going to get to. But what you want is, you don't want 100, but you want a decent number where you can build a partnership long-term. I think that's probably the best dream I can give you, if you want to be one of those partners where you're building that, because that, I think, is sustainable in the long term.
Cheers.
We're around about 5 minutes until the end. So actually, I'm just going to share some of the tools actually that Sedex has coming out. We've got a lot of our members in the room today, which we hope will help support this journey on achieving impact from the start. And the first one, which I think we've covered in a number of the questions, which we hope will add some real value for all of our membership categories, but particularly for the suppliers, is actually a directory portal where members will be able to, they will opt in, and then they will be able to share information about their organisations and some of the positive impacts that they're making. And quite often we're challenged, and I just came back from a visit with Jose's team in Chile and Brazil, and a number of the conversations with the suppliers is, how do we really showcase the good work that we're doing, and how do we give more value, show more value to potential customers? So this is something we're going to be opening up for all Sedex membership. It's due to launch in the next 4 to 6 weeks. I've got our CIO in the front of the room, so he's nodding his head, so that's encouraging. You can see we're already pretty much there in testing at the moment, and we hope that will be a real value add for members. Equally, for the challenge that we mentioned around finding data for the buying organisations, this is a way to search the supplier database by product and by country to try and find which of those suppliers are already in the Sedex platform and potentially sharing good information. Hi.
You have to be a member to be able to see it.
It is a Sedex member tool, and that's very explicit, because certainly in the way that we share our data, so it will be, as I say, an opt-in, choose to share data tool. But we very much hope members will see the value in that, and we'll share through that.
Will members be invited to opt in then? Is that
Absolutely. We have a marketing campaign going out. There's a number of ways you'll be reached out to through the Sedex Advanced platform. And Mark, again, we've got our marketing team in the back of the room as well. We're working with our members to make sure they get the options to opt in. Hopefully it will also encourage improvement in some of the data. So we're going to be encouraging people to update contact data, etc. So make sure we've got good data in that directory. So we're really excited about that. And equally, something that was launched yesterday at the Sedex Stakeholder Forum meeting was our new e-learning platform, which again is due to launch in the next couple of weeks. In the first iteration of that, it's very much focused around better engagement with our platform. So helping members use the platform, get involved, sign up, make payments. There's a lot of interactive learning modules in there, which we think will certainly enhance that whole experience. But beyond that, we're also looking at additional modules around some of those complex topics that we talk around, forced labour, health and safety issues. So there's actually opportunities for people to go in there and take some learning modules. So again, something that we feel will add a great deal of value. This isn't going to completely replace our training program in terms of physical on-the-ground training, because we also recognise not everyone will be able to access this, but we do think it will be a real game changer for simplicity of using our system. So we're very excited about that.
I'll give you a microphone.
Oh, sorry. Hi, so as an AB member, we're doing work with our factories, which are B members, and then they can opt in to share their information to the whole of Sedex directory. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. So if they've joined as a Sedex member, as a supplier member,
Yes.
they will then additionally be able to opt in. It's part of their membership. They will get access to the supplier directory, and then they can then use that as an added value. And I think when you're trying to encourage suppliers onto the platform, hopefully that will help be an additional incentive.
Is that potentially opening up our suppliers to our competitors?
but potentially it does if those suppliers choose to show and those competitors are on the market. The information that we'll be sharing, very much the same as all data that's shared on Sedex, is non-commercial information.
Right.
Hopefully that's more of a benefit around sharing good practice.
Okay. Thank you.
Perfect. And then finally, it's not a new product, but I think something that we have found has been very helpful as people start their journey is actually a resource. I'm actually going to ask Rebekah just to share how she works with her team, with the ethical trade coordinators, with certain members.
So we have a number of people within Sedex that are kind of seconded to our member businesses. They work within those businesses either in the Sedex office or within that member's office on behalf of Sedex, basically doing a number of different activities. So they could be doing supplier engagement, audit management, they could be managing the strategy, they could be, if you're at the start of your journey, helping you to shape kind of your objectives and analyse your data. They might be collecting your supplier data for you. There's a number of different activities that we have available within the Ethical Trade Coordinators team. We have some collateral around this service now that wasn't available before. I'm aware of times, so if you do want any more information on that particular service, please come and speak to me or speak to your account manager.
Sorry, just to add, there is marketing material for all the services that Jan's just described and a whole load more. They are either physical, if you're still old-fashioned and want physical pieces of card, they're at the Sedex stand in the King George suite. Alternatively, if you've downloaded the app, then if you just scroll across, you'll be able to download every single one of the individual pieces of material. So they're all in there as well.
So I think that was our good Sedex plug and hopefully some value for your membership. I don't know, have I got time for one more question, or have I got any more questions from the audience? Fantastic. Well, look, thank you all very much for your engagement today. Hopefully there's been some useful takeaways. Just remains for me to thank our panel. Thank you for sharing today, and I'm sure enjoy the rest of your day at the Sedex Conference. Thank you all very much.